This one's called The Jungle. When I was recruited into Special Forces, I didn't think much of it. They explained that all we could do was be paratroopers and go behind enemy lines, which at the time sounded kinda cool. Anyways, I was young and willing to take orders. How did you get assigned the mission? I was 23, and I was stationed in North Vietnam where I met the contractors. Who were the contractors? Lieutenant Curry and Colonel Sanma. They had come up to me and given me the opportunity. When they asked, I listened. It was my first mission, so I thought nothing of it. They took me to headquarters at the base. Man, I know it's weird, but it seemed like they had a very long hallway. It felt like centuries had passed before we actually got to the meeting room. When we finally did, they sat me down at this large round table. They told me that if I were to not want to do this mission, I would have to back out now before any details were given. You know, the strange part is, I know they talked to me about the mission, but I don't remember. I don't remember anything about our briefing. Why? I don't know. What was the mission? I'm taking a big risk here telling you. You know that. If I tell you, you might not live to see tomorrow. I'll take my chances. They had told me that a CIA cargo plane had crashed near a village in Vietnam a week ago. The cargo plane was carrying a secret biochemical weapon that was called Blue Grass. Our mission, go in and recover the weapon, and take anyone out that was in our way. The mission was announced as Operation Forest Fire. How did you get to the village? I was taken with 3 other men, Jen, Trent, and Barbat. We went by a Humvee to a city called Da Nang. Then from there we traveled by foot about 15 miles into the jungle. How long did it take you to travel to the village? It took us about a day. As we journeyed further into the jungle, I began to feel almost constricted, like the air was being taken out of me. I also had the feeling that someone was breathing down my neck, or someone was staring at me. Finally, when we got too close to the village, we noticed very peculiar things. Like what peculiar things? The outside had stakes, with bodies, as well as other bodies lying around. When we saw the bodies, we just realized what kind of shithole we were caught in. Were the villagers friendly? When we entered the village, you could smell the rotting flesh in the air that was coming from a burn pile inside the village. I ended up seeing my breakfast by first glance. So did Trent. And to this day, I'm surprised the others didn't throw up either. All around, bodies of women and children were lying around, like they were trash. No burial, just tossed aside. Who had killed the villagers? When we saw the bodies, we figured that the Viet Cong had passed through. We checked the bodies, but oddly enough, Viet Cong bodies were lying on the ground. What did you do with the bodies? We couldn't really do anything, though my heart told me to do something. My brain was focused on the mission, nothing else. We were just about to leave when we heard cries. Cries? From who? They came from a girl, sounded no older than 6. The cries seemed to be coming from a nearby hut. We went to investigate. As we got closer to one of the standing huts, the cries became sadder and more demented. When we finally reached the tent, it sounded like the girl was in your ear, crying and crying. I opened up the flap to a bamboo hut and saw a small girl. In front of her lay a mangled body. The body was a woman. Her black matted hair and foggy gray eyes had set a shiver down my spine. Along with the pool of blood surrounding the woman, the girl was on her knees, staring at the body. I slowly walked to her, and as the moaning and crying got louder and louder, I could feel evil. The kind of evil that only Satan himself would give off. My fellow soldiers had warned me before I even went in there that we couldn't help the girl, but I ignored him. Something about her was hypnotizing me. I was drawn to her. When I was about 2 feet away, the crying stopped. I finally opened my mouth and asked, "Are you okay?" She stood up and turned around. Half of her right cheek was missing, revealing nasty and bloody teeth with flesh still in between. Her eyes were pitch black and full of darkness. Her skin and her arms had seemed to be slowly rotting away. Her nose was missing, and her hair was full of pores and lots of bald spots. When I slowly began to back away, she looked at me straight in the face and whispered. As the soft and seductive whispers filled my head, I saw images.
Of what, Mr. Wood?
Of evil. Just pure evil. Images of young, mutilated children, cannibals, monsters, demons, killers.
What happened next?
She screamed so loud that it almost made my ears bleed. I closed my eyes and I fired my rifle. My bullet was followed along by my crew's bullets as well, with the sounds of penetrating bones and flesh. Then we realized our mission wasn't even half done.
Well, that is horrifying.
Tell me something I don't know.
What did you do after the mission?
We followed the map that had been given to us by the contractors. We were about 20 miles away, and since it was already dark, we decided to rest until tomorrow. Our tents had been pitched, and we started a fire and ate our MREs. That night, we hadn't said a word. We just sat there with the girl haunting our thoughts. We went to sleep early that night. It was around 4 a.m. when I heard noise outside my tent. It sounded like footsteps, which made me believe that it was most likely an animal of some sort. But in the back of my head, I had a feeling that whoever was there was somebody that I would regret seeing. So when I grabbed my rifle, I pretended I was ready, but I had no idea.
Who was it? Mr. Wood?
There were 3 people. All were naked and looked pale, like they hadn't seen daylight in their lives. All 3 were men. The men had no hair, and their teeth pointed out of their mouths, so they seemed to have no ears. Their eyes were pitch black, and they crawled on all 4s, and they had their heads in the air, smelling for us. They were coming to hunt. I slowly took out my rifle and put the barrel through the unzipped portion and fired. The bullet hit the woman in the head. The others quickly turned and noticed me, which forced me to fire on all 3 men. I hit all of them. The others immediately jumped out of their tents and came out with their guns. They asked me what it was, and all I could do was just stare at the 3 bodies.
What did they say about that?
They were creeped out as I was, but for some reason, I cut off their heads.
Why?
The voices told me so.
What did you do with the heads?
I put them around my belt.
What happened after you decapitated them?
We decided to keep guard until next morning. When morning came, we traveled first thing.
How far was the objective?
From where we were, 10 miles away. As we traveled, hours had passed. When we got to the objective, we were confused.
Why?
There was no plain. We saw nothing, just jungle. Thinking we were off, we headed further in, which was probably the stupidest idea I could think of.
How is that?
We got lost. We tried turning around, retracing, anything we could think of.
What happened then?
We were trapped in the jungle. After about 2 days, we snapped out of denial. We accepted that we were trapped. We began to dig holes, which is where we would sleep in. Just in case we died, we would dig our own graves already. Every night, the voices of the owls hooting, and all the other inhabitants come to life as we went to sleep. It was troubling. I felt like I was being watched.
Like when you first arrived?
Yes, exactly like that.
So, what happened while you were in the jungle?
With our rifles, we were able to hunt, mostly birds. But after a week, the ammo slowly deteriorated. Within 2 weeks, we had to make spears to catch animals. But to our dismay, there were no animals that liked to come across us. Night after night, I could hear her seductive whispers flood my mind, and I would see the images in my head. Every time I would see an image, one of my men died. Barbat was first. He died of the flu. Jen died of mosquito bite. And Tret...
What happened to him?
He said he was going to look for help. He never came back.
Where did you put the bodies of your squad members?
I don't remember.
Mr. Wood, you were in that jungle for 5 years. You must have known where you buried the bodies, because we didn't find them in their graves where they dug.
I don't know where they went.
What did you do in the jungle? For instance, how did you survive?
At night, I would hear the monsters that attacked our camp, and I would hunt.
What would you hunt?
Anything. Mostly gophers. I caught more than I could count. Days, months, years passed. I became an animal. Every time I would sleep, if I did sleep, I would hear the voices and whispers, and see the images. I was still a kid.
What was the last thing you remember in the jungle? What was the last thing you remember in the jungle?
I was sleeping. Dark had come, so I slept in my ditch. As I slept, I heard the footsteps of the monsters. I quickly grabbed my spear and headed to a nearby tree. As I waited, they came closer and closer. Finally, when they were right beneath me, there were 3 of them. This was odd because I saw more than that usually. It didn't matter to me, though. I just dropped down and speared the one in the middle. It spewed through his neck, and the other 2 tackled me. I laid there fighting. When I was hit with something, I ended up here.
Mr. Wood, I need to tell you something.
What?
The village you came across. There was no village. Never existed. And you were found with the heads of Jen, Barbat, and Tret. Also, for 5 years, women, children, and men have been going missing. 4 or 5 years now. All going into the path of the jungle. Over 200 people, Mr. Wood. Do you know where you are, Mr. Wood?
No.
You are at the Trennan's Hospital for the Criminally Insane. You've been here for 3 months. Do you know who I am?
No.
I am someone that will tell the truth. I'm the one that exposes our dark, hellish world that we live in. You were drugged, Mr. Wood. They brainwashed you, for an experiment known as Operation Sanity. I will get this story out, Mr. Wood. I'll make sure this interview is heard.